We always talk about our three customers. We talk about our animals, our staff, and our visitors or our community. Our three customers all need to get something positive from either living in the zoo, working in the zoo, or visiting the zoo. So when we're putting together experiences, we think about that. We would never, ever compromise animal welfare, nor would we compromise staff welfare or visitor welfare. So we have to think very carefully about what we do. We need to think about the story, and I think zoos generally could be much better at this, in my view. What's the story that you're trying to tell about these animals? How are you wanting to engage people with these animals? Not just a wonderful place for them to live, but what's the story that you want people to take away? And what's the action that you want people to take, and how are you helping them to take that action?
Hello, kia ora. I'm Anna.
And I'm Callum from Conservation Amplified.
And you're listening to the People Helping Nature podcast.
Our mission is to make conservation mainstream, one topic at a time.
Welcome back. Today, we have a very special guest on board. Karen Fifield has been the CEO of Wellington Zoo since 2006, but she also wears a number of other hats on the international stage and in local New Zealand conservation. Welcome, Karen.
Kia ora. Very nice to be here.
Kia ora. Nice to have you on the show.
Would you like to start by introducing yourself and your involvement and contributions in the zoo space?
So my name is Karen Fifield and I'm the Chief Executive at Te Nukuao Wellington Zoo. I've been here since 2006, and previous to that I worked in zoos in Sydney and in Melbourne. And I've always been interested in conservation even when I was teaching. I used to work with my students to do a lot of habitat restoration and things like that. So conservation's always been part of my DNA. So I came into zoos via education, and that's obviously been important to me as well, because I think for me, animals and people are two of my biggest loves, I think. And I think people and animals together is something we should all be really trying to make the world a better place for both of those, animals and people.
Thank you for introducing yourself. So before we really get into the nitty-gritties of zoos, can you please set the scene for us, as in what zoos used to be and what they are now, because there's quite a bit of an evolution that's taken place in that space.
There has been, and if you look way back when the first public zoo was established was back in the 1700s. It was a very different society and a very different world then. And it was very much almost like a living museum. Zoos have moved a lot in the time since then, that they are now conservation organisations. And what I'm talking about is progressive and leading zoos. Zoos that understand their importance in society, the importance for animal welfare and for conservation of species. So there's been quite a shift in moving from the museum type mentality and a collector mentality of having a number of animals out of curiosity, rather than having animals that you can care for well, that you can have stories about that actually lead people to change their behaviour in terms of protecting the planet together and how we work as a community for saving species. So zoos that are doing that very well are what I would call progressive and leading zoos. And they have really embraced what a modern, progressive, future-looking zoo is all about. When I say zoos, I'm actually talking about aquariums as well as zoos.
Fantastic. Now, before we get into Wellington Zoo, I'd just love to zoom out a little bit more to understand the historical context. You said the first public zoo arose in the 1700s and it was more of a living museum, but our connection to animals, to nature, and to wildlife in particular has gone back a lot further than that. Earlier this year, we were in London and I was looking around the Tower of London, and it was showing the history of keeping various beasts and animals and monkeys there. And that was, as I understand it, happening before we had public zoos. So what led up to having public zoos, and how did we get to a point of saying, let's open these to the public? Like, what was the historical context before that?
A lot of it was about status. A lot of it was about kings or queens actually gifting animals to other kings and queens. And it was part of the status. If you had a lion, or you had some curious animal that no one else was able to house, which is why those animals ended up in the Tower of London. Lions were there. And so there was this whole idea around the status of animals being seen as some sort of a commodity, I suppose, in terms of what you could show about yourself as a human in terms of the animals you were caring for. And really what happened was the French Revolution. So when the French Revolution happened, the menagerie of the king was open to the people of Paris. And so that is really sort of what happened in terms of a public zoo. So the people of Paris got to see these animals that were bizarre, curious, never be seen by people before in Paris. So that's really what it took, was a total revolution. But that's really where it started. But previous to that, as you say, people have always been curious about animals. People have always tried to understand them. They're interested in these strange creatures that we share the planet with. But probably what we've now got in society is more an understanding that those animals are sentient, that they have their own feelings, their own thoughts. We understand this. Back in the day, I don't even think we thought that about each other in some extent, but I think we now understand the science of animals a lot more. And we are learning more by the day. We still don't know everything about every animal species on the planet. So that animal science area will continue to grow. And a lot of that really important animal science work does happen in good zoos because we have these animals that we care for and that we know extremely well. And that research and learning component about the animal's behaviour, about their needs, about their welfare perspectives, all of those things we're constantly learning, and we can contribute back to the body of science about those animals.
Wow. I did not know that we have the French Revolution to thank for the first public
Yeah.
zoo. That was one major change, and the other major change was when zoos turned into these conservation-focused organizations. Did that come with understanding the sentience, or was there some other trigger that led to that next shift in the world?
I do think it's been probably, and I remember, I mean, I've been working in zoos now for 35 years, and I can remember we go through these stages where it gets very scientific and you can't even name the animals. They just have to have a number because it had to be, the animal was its own entity and you couldn't name it. It's the stuff that Jane Goodall faced when she was working with the chimps, and she was told by scientists, you should not be naming these chimps. But she did, because they were entities to her that required something more than just a number. And then we went through a period where we did name the animals. Now we've got a mixture of, yes, they do have their registration numbers, if you like, but they also have their names. And I think that makes them more, it's more of them having almost an identity and an essence of their own. And I do think that we can go too far sometimes, either end of the pendulum. And I think somewhere in the middle, which is where good zoos are now, I think is really right, because people in our community really relate to the animals as individuals. It's different in a conservation setting in the wild, where the animals are living out there, like the kiwi that have been released in the hills of Wellington. You know, they don't have, or some of them do actually have names. So it varies in terms of the context. But I do think that that idea that we recognise the animals are their own entities and their own individuals. Because even within a species, even within the animals that we have here at Wellington, they're all individual. Like our chimps are not all the same. They've all got their own essence. And I think that understanding that has become more and more clear to us who work in the animal space. And I mean, as I said, I think it's growing and changing. And I think, 20 years' time, there might be something else, in terms of how we look after animals and giving them more agency and things like that about their lives. I think it's a moving thing, it's a changing thing, and I think it's a good thing that it's changing, because the more we know, the more we can make those lives better for animals in the wild and also in zoos.
Thank you for setting the scene for us, Karen. It's so important to understand the bigger picture here, I think. But I really want to zoom into your mahi at Wellington Zoo. And one of my favorite things about Wellington Zoo is the Animal and Wildlife Hospital, which actually is in the visitor area of the zoo. So, visible clue that zoo and conservation efforts go hand in hand. Can you tell us more about that, and as well point out why it's so important that it's in the visitor area and not behind the scenes?
My whole time in zoos, it's always been a lot of the really cool work happens behind the scenes. And sometimes it has to happen behind the scenes for a whole variation of reasons. But I've always had the belief and the philosophy that whatever we can be transparent about, whatever we can show people that we're doing, what is the work, we should take that opportunity. So when we built Te Kohanga, It was really a process where we discussed how much we were going to have on visitor view. And we had a lot of debate around things like postmortems and whether or not we would do that on visitor view. We reached the conclusion that we could not just control the narrative, but include people in the narrative to understand the care that had gone into these animals before we had to euthanize them or whatever. So we always have taken the principle that we're as transparent as possible. Sometimes we can't do things on visitor view, but we're always very open in our social media talking about what we've done for these animals. The animals are not ours. The animals are themselves. So we have to have respect for them and respect for their story. So being able to tell that story with respect and with dignity is really important. And that's about being transparent and saying we care about these animals and this is what we've done to make their life better and to give them a good death.
And I think that's why I really like going there. It's because you learn so much more than just your normal zoo story. It's really actively involving the visitor on all sites and all things zoo.
And it's happening more and more in the zoo world. You know, a lot of the new veterinary hospitals that are being built around the world are actually taking that model and using that model of transparency and talking to people about the care that we give to wildlife. 70% of their caseload is wildlife. 30% is the animals in our care, but you know, often people can't see what's happening with wildlife when they're brought into a zoo hospital. So it's really important. People might never have seen an albatross, for example. When you see an albatross up close for the first time, it is like magic. I mean, they look like they are painted beings. They don't look real. So for people to be able to see this magical animal up close into Kohanga is incredible. Or when we've had kakapo into Kohanga. I mean, they're incredible animals. And so to be able to show people this and show how we care for them, it's actually a game changer for people. And it's certainly a game changer for zoos, I think. I think you're right, Anna, that being able to show people this, being able to talk about the care, people can ask questions of our vets or our animal care teams. They're very willing to answer them. It just brings the whole community behind the conservation of those species.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I love albatross. Just a side note. They're so beautiful. And their wingspan, massive.
They just do not look real. They're like some magical being that's come out of myth and legend.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important that with a environment like the veterinary hospital, you are able to show the public in a way that's transparent, but also safe for the wildlife and for the
Yeah.
habitats. In conservation, we often have to hide a lot away from the public. You don't want people knowing where the penguin burrow is or where a certain species of wildlife is because you never know what the rogue actor does online. And so it's difficult. And so I think it's really important that you're doing this and you're taking people along on the journey. But what else happens behind the scenes at Wellington Zoo?
I mean, we work with native species and we also work globally with critically endangered and endangered species as well. But for example, our Whitaker skinks, that we hold a lot of the population of what is now remaining of Whitaker skinks with other partners as well. They are not on visitor view. We do take people into the space where they are. You know, sometimes we take people from the conservation community into those spaces, but we don't have them on visitor view. And the reason for that is not about not wanting to share them. It's actually because of the type of environment that they have to live in. It's very climate controlled. It's very scientific the way we have to manage those animals. So we can't actually replicate that in the visitor space. So the animals are kept in Te Iti and they're actually managed in this very scientific way. We do have other animals that are also not on visitor view, like our tuatara. Again, the same reason. It's about the environment we need to build for them. We do have plans to put tuatara back into the visitor view because we have had them there before. We do have one at the moment in our living room, which is our visitor space for the kids and learning. So we do have some that are in visitor view, but the bulk of our tuatara population is not on visitor view.
Having those animals on site, what does that mean for conservation? Like, how does that actively contribute to what happens out there in the wild?
Well, I'll talk about the Whitaker skinks again because we know that they are extinct in the wild in the environment where these ones have come from. So there are other partners who also hold some of the animals. But what the plan is to try and breed these animals within the zoo environment to understand a little bit more about their science, if you like their genetics, their propensity to breed, who's the best pairing to do. So the science behind managing those small populations is something that zoos do very well. So we've got a lot of software that we can use to actually do that data analysis. So we use a system called ZIMS, which is the Zoo Information Management System. It's a global system. We can feed data into that, and that can do a lot of analysis for us in terms of, matching pairs and things like that. The other thing is looking at the behaviours of the Whittaker skinks, because they're the second most aggressive skink in the country, and we've never really understood before how aggressive they are, because they do kill each other. So we've got to make sure that we are not putting them in a situation where they will do that, because the population's so fragile and so small, we don't want to lose any. So all of our skinks at the moment are in individual habitats. So then it's thinking about how do we set them up for breeding. And then eventually, and this is a long-term project between all the partners of this project, including Department of Conservation, eventually we would love to release them again. But it's making sure the population is genetically sound, it's big enough that we can put them back out there, and if they are aggressive and kill each other, at least we're going to have some survive. So it is about that survival rate. So there's a lot of science behind how we manage this population in a conservation outcome for this little skink that is a beautiful animal. So we really want to get those animals back into the wild. And the same with Wellington green geckos, because they used to be very common in Wellington, but they're pretty much gone because of a whole range of things. Obviously introduced predators, but they get eaten by birds. What we would like to do is make sure we can breed enough Wellington green geckos that we could start to have a community project where people could find Wellington green geckos in their backyards like they used to be, and the community protects them. So that if they've got someone that owns a cat, they don't let the cat out where the green gecko is. So how do we actually work with community to make sure that these little tiny, again, magical little things with these bright blue mouths can actually be back in Wellington in everyone's backyard like they used to be? That is just incredible to me. If we could succeed in that, that really adds another dimension to the biophilic city that Wellington is. If we can get those geckos back in backyards right across the city, that'd be so cool.
That would be amazing, and also so cool how really locally to Wellington that is.
Yeah.
But I just want to touch on what you said before with the skink work. So essentially you're preventing an extinction from happening by the work you're doing through the zoo.
And with our other partners, because there are other partners involved in the project as well. So, managed through the Department of Conservation. And then what we want to do is make sure that the population we've got, which is only, about 50, 60 animals, we can grow that population and that we can eventually put them back where they were. Because I do think that it's really important. I did a project when I was at Taronga Zoo about green and golden bell frogs, and they were common in Sydney, everywhere. We did a project where we took a couple of school groups and we had 5-year-olds measuring the growth of these little tadpoles when we released them. 5-year-olds. We had a PhD student working with us, and they were blown away by these kids. We had teenagers who we were taking out in the middle of the night and putting on their waders, and they were microchipping frogs. And what was interesting, when we go down to this place where we released the frogs and the tadpoles, all the old people came out and they said, we remember when these frogs were everywhere when we were kids. What can we do to help? So the local council got involved. They put things in the rate notices. The whole community came together about protecting these frogs. So I think if you can get people excited about the animals, and again, how they can help. See, again, I'm really transparent about that, because I think, someone might go and do something down in that space, but the rest of the people will police it. They'll go, don't do that. And I've seen people do this in Wellington on the beaches. Your dog should be on a lead. And then people push back and then they say, no, the dog should be on a lead. There's penguins here. So people will start to make their own decisions about what's right and what's not, and they will police it and protect the animals. Because I saw that firsthand with the green and golden bell frogs. And we used to have these people who were much older than me at the time, they'd be down there with the kids cleaning up litter and doing all sorts of things. So I think for me, conservation should not be hidden away from people. People should embrace it. People who are the experts in it need to work out good communication about how they're going to involve the community. And Frog Focus was that for me. It was a really good model about how to get a whole community behind saving a really precious little frog. I do think that we can do that a lot more with community. I think people are willing to do it. I mean, all the people who visit the zoo, the 250,000 of them that come, they're all here because they care about animals. So how do we mobilize this group of people? What a critical mass of change we could make if we could mobilize them and let them loose for conservation. That'd be so cool, wouldn't it? The conservationists don't have to do it. The community's going to help them do it.
Absolutely. And I love how your education background ties into your lens looking at this. Like, you see how education lit that fire under the community with the frogs in Australia. They then took leadership. And I see some analogies, whilst I wasn't there when that happened, to Wellington. Wellington has so much leadership in the community space for conservation. And so you've got a really good foundation. But as I understand it, you also help to support and accelerate the work of community through grants.
Yes, so we have a local grants program that we actually fund through our conservation fund at the zoo. And every year people submit their requests. We've just actually allocated another $16,000 this year for some of those projects. A lot of them are to do with predator control. Some of them are to do with, we've just funded a project around looking at assessing bat populations in Wellington. We do work in the Chatham Islands that we've supported, particularly for Taikor Trust and for predator control. So there's a whole range of different projects. Some of it's related to plants, not just animals. We do allocate between $16,000 and $20,000 a year for local conservation grants. And, you know, some people, there was one that was amazing. We had people doing some predator control and they were going into people's backyards and trying to, you know, set their traps and things. And people were like, why are you in my backyard? So we actually funded for them to have vests that could show people, like hazard vests, you know, that they were here doing predator control. So they weren't getting asked all these questions by people. So we can fund something as basic as that. And that's, again, about that community communication. You know, we're doing this for a good reason, not just loitering in your backyard. You know, we're doing something that's really valuable. So yes, the local conservation grants are important, as well as our conservation partners that we have locally and globally as well.
So you're essentially doing conservation in the zoo through the wildlife hospital and then through the captive populations that you hold. You're supporting groups on the ground via the grants. And you just mentioned globally as well. So it's not just in Aotearoa, right? It is also worldwide. So what's your favorite example that you have how Wellington Zoo has stepped up onto the global conservation space to do their bit?
That is such a hard question to answer because I love them all.
Picking favourites.
And I know. I think for me, you know, with a zoo, because we have native species and we do have global species, it's really important to work in both areas. So I think that the New Zealand work we do, I'm really proud of, and we've deliberately gone towards reptiles and invertebrates because a lot of people have done a lot of work with birds. And, you know, we have bred kaka for release before, but now we've moved into the space of reptiles and invertebrates. But with our global programs, what they are linked to is any of the critically endangered animals that we have at the zoo. So quite specific reasons that we would have those partnerships, although we have branched out a little bit in terms of some of those projects, but mostly they're to do with New Zealand projects. So, for example, Porting Chatham Islands Taikor Trust. So we have had taikor at Te Kohanga. So they've been flown over from the Chathams to the hospital. And one of them didn't make it, but the other one has bred. I think she's had 3 clutches since she was here. So they tend to be animals that we might not actually have at the zoo, but we can support in the wild. With the global ones, we would always choose animals that are either endangered or critically endangered. The project I really love is to do with our white-cheeked gibbons, because white-cheeked gibbons are more endangered than chimpanzees, probably one of the most endangered apes on the planet. And we were a founding partner with Fauna and Flora in a national park in Vietnam to set up this project for white-cheeked gibbons. So as a founding partner to the project, it means that we've been in there right at the beginning, and it's a really important project. Our gibbons, Robin and Wilson, are iconic to Wellington Zoo, and as I said, critically endangered animals. So I think that the one for me is a real good alignment between animals that are iconic for us, critically endangered, needing immense help in the wild, and we can be in those projects actually working with people on the ground to ensure their habitats are safe.
What does a partnership with, say, the white-cheeked gibbon actually mean? I go to zoos and I see, here's our partnerships on a global map. I understand you work with the people on the ground. There may be some exchange of funding. There may be some exchange of skills. But is there a standard way that these partnerships look like? Or, what does it actually mean behind that image on the display board?
It really depends on what the partner wants. Like, for example, with our snow leopards, when we were choosing a partner to work with there, we had a partnership with Red Panda Network in Nepal. So we talked to them first and said, who do you think we should partner with for snow leopards? Because they, live in the same environments, whatever. So they introduced us to Mountain Spirit. So we talked to Mountain Spirit about, what do you need from us that you can't get anywhere else? So they already had good knowledge of snow leopards. They knew where the snow leopards were. But one of the things they really needed was more support for people living in villages who might be living in snow leopard country and might have had some problems with snow leopards and livestock. So education programs, building new ways of finding food, that sort of thing is really what Mountain Spirit needed funding for. So we provided that funding. It was really interesting is when we opened snow leopards, Shailendra came from Nepal, from Mountain Spirit, and he's worked with snow leopard conservation for 30 odd years. He had never seen a snow leopard until he saw ours.
Wow.
And that was mind-blowing to me because I thought that is true dedication. He had never seen this animal that he had spent 30 years protecting and working with communities to protect. And ours were the first ones he ever saw. I thought, wow, how many conservationists would actually do that? I don't know if there's many. They'd still want to see their animal, right, that they're focusing on. So this man was like a hero to me. I thought, wow, if we can support him to do even more for snow leopards, I'm all for that. So it depends on the partner. So it depends what they need, where they are at in the process of their project. So, for example, Proyecto Titi in Colombia that works with cotton top tamarins, their conservation project for cotton tops has been going for many, many years. So they have a very different need to someone who's just starting out or someone who's working in a different part of the world. So it varies, in short.
So it's essentially connecting to the project that reached out and finding the gap that they need support in and stepping in where no one else would, because we are trying to come to the same, I guess, goal, which is protecting that species.
That's right. Or adding more value to something they're already doing. Like, Mountain Spirit was already working with communities. We just added more value and more resources for them to be able to do more in that space. So sometimes it's about being able to do more, just not about filling a gap.
That is so amazing. Thank you for pointing that out. I also think the snow leopard example proves how elusive and shy some of those endangered species are, which is why I think it's even more so important to build a connection between people and animal through that zoo. And before we move on to education, I've got one last question for you on this conservation, the active mahi, because I also know that your staff does fieldwork out in the wild. So why is that important? Like, what unique angle can a zoo provide in the field?
I think for me, it's about our people connecting what's happening in the wild with the animals they care for. Because ex situ and in situ conservation are two sides of the one coin. So it's about the continuum of where people can bring their expertise to the saving of that species. So there's an organisation called the Conservation Planning Specialist Group who are part of the IUCN, and they have a process called a one-plan approach. So one-plan approach is like, we're here with the animal, we want to be here with its survival. So where on the continuum can all the partners play their part? And I think for zoos in this, I think some of our husbandry experience that we can bring to wild populations is really important. I think, that small population management work is incredible around the science. But I do think also our staff learn a lot when they go out into the field. It's not just what they can do, it's what they can learn and how they can understand their animals even more deeply, because this is what they're facing in the wild. I'm seeing it with my own eyes. I get it. And I'm going to talk to people about that. So they bring back a lot of information, a lot of knowledge as well that they can share with their peers and also with our communities. So it's a win-win for me if they go out into the wild and they work with these animals, work with conservationists who are working with them, because it just brings the thing together. It's bringing that whole continuum together in terms of saving species.
Yes, I totally agree. I actually have my own experience with marrying, I guess, in situ versus out in the wild with kiwi. And I have to say that working in the field and combining that with a captive experience has made me a better handler, a better conservationist for the species, and also broader. I wouldn't want to miss it for the world.
I agree. It just brings it together, right?
I think this must be quite surprising to hear for some people when they might go to the zoo thinking it's a nice day of entertainment. Earlier in this podcast, we talked about the old menagerie concept and how it was status and entertainment, and conservation, education. All of these points are important. So, as I understand it, people walking into Wellington Zoo, or any zoo, modern zoo for that matter, have different expectations, different needs. So how do you merge those interests and expectations with animal welfare, with education, with advocacy, and with conservation in a way that keeps people engaged?
So we always talk about our three customers. We talk about our animals, our staff, and our visitors or our community. Our three customers all need to get something positive from either living in the zoo, working in the zoo, or visiting the zoo. So when we're putting together experiences, we think about that. We would never, ever compromise animal welfare, nor would we compromise staff welfare or visitor welfare. So we have to think very carefully about what we do. We need to think about the story, and I think zoos generally could be much better at this, in my view. What's the story that you're trying to tell about these animals? How are you wanting to engage people with these animals? Not just a wonderful place for them to live, but what's the story that you want people to take away? And what's the action that you want people to take, and how are you helping them to take that action? So, for example, just buying FSC product. It's an easy thing to do when you go shopping for paper or wood. Look for FSC. So we need to get better, I think, in the zoo space around that storytelling. And I do think that's something that we do very well at Te Nukuao in terms of linking the story to the animal. Just as an example, we've just refurbished our otter habitat. We've just built them a new indoor house and things like that. But the messaging that we've done with that is about social media. Because often on social media, you will see things like otter cafes and being able to hold the otter's hands and things like that, which looks very cute, but it's not very good. And it's not good for the animal's welfare at all, because they could be housed in very small boxes and then they come out to play with people. And we've just used that in terms of our storytelling to say, think before you like around social media. So it's not always about a species sign or a science message. Sometimes it's about a social message, like buy FSC timber. Don't like things on social media that you think look cute, but actually think about what that means for the animal in that scenario. So often we think about social messaging as much as we do about scientific messaging. You can do an otter encounter. You could come and meet them. You can't go in with them because they'll bite your fingers, but you can actually go in closer and meet them and prepare their enrichment food and stuff like that, and then put it out into the habitat and watch them go out and get it. And you get quite close to them and it's very loud.
I'm so glad that you've addressed this, because it's something that I sometimes get sad about. I go on social media and then I see this reel and I'm like, this poor animal, why does that have so many likes? So I think that's such a big piece of the puzzle. And then also saying to people, hey, you can be close to this animal, for example, via our otter encounter, but it is designed in a way that
Correct.
everyone has fun and it's safe for the animals.
Just adding to that point, like when you see bad animal welfare on social media, I'm one to click on the comments because then you get a real feel for what the audience actually wants to say. So much of it comes from a place of not understanding. It's like,
Yeah.
that's so cute, you should pat it more. Where can I pat this otter? As an example. I think, you need to plant those seeds of change, and seeing them in the zoo is such a great way.
Yeah.
When people are so captivated, it's the perfect place to educate about things that might be in our subconscious, but if you plant that seed, it grows, and it might not be tomorrow that people change, but you need that seed for the tree to grow.
When they are ready emotionally to hear those messages, it's ideal. A friend of mine years ago did a project at Melbourne Zoo when he followed people around with heart monitors to see when their heart's rate went up around which animals they saw. And it was really interesting work because what that proved at that moment when their heart was getting excited, they weren't open to messages because their frontal cortex had shut down at that point. They weren't thinking, they were just emoting. So understanding there's a journey that people go on when they visit the zoo, and you can't bombard people with a whole lot of messages because they don't think and they don't remember. It's not about that they don't want to. It's a physical thing that happens in physiology and human species. So it's understanding what happens in the human mind and how they actually take in those experiences and when they're ready for the messaging. And that's why I do love our encounter program, because we get half an hour with people, 40 minutes with people, where you can actually have those conversations with people who care for the animals every day. They're excited and they're happy, but then they start to calm down and they start to think about the messaging. So having that deeper conversation is really lovely to me when we have people in the encounters doing this work, because the messaging is about what you can do to actually help these animals. So yeah, it's thinking about all of those things when you put the experience together to make sure that you've got the human dimension as much as the animal dimension when you're talking about storytelling.
For sure. You've touched on some really good points there. I think you said that zoos can definitely improve in the way that they communicate this, that the encounters give you that more intimate experience, but that also the way you design your visitor experience can also give that, help with the education. But we're not all the same. Like, a child is going to want something different to a parent, to a grandparent, to someone whose second language or third language is English. And that's a real challenge for zoos. So how do you address that? Like, are there any practical ways or any philosophical or approaches that you take when you're thinking about how you design it to be suitable for the most people?
Our visitor engagement team, I think, are magical. They come up with these ways of actually engaging people, and they do a lot of training with the rest of the staff in terms of face-to-face interpretation. And again, how we put the stories together. What does it aesthetically look like? How do we build play experiences into the zoo that is mimicking what we would call parallel play? So up at the chimps, for example, you can see the chimps in their habitat, and then the kids have parallel play equipment that is like where the chimps play. So you're getting that mixture. So the parents have somewhere to sit and relax and think about what they've been seeing. Kids can keep playing, and the chimps are there as well. So putting all of this together in design is quite a unique expertise of zoos, because we can think about how we're putting those messages together and how are we weaving that message through our site. And that's why I'm a big believer in not having a collector mentality, because I think you need to have the animals in your zoo that support the story that you're trying to tell, and also that you can care for well. And I always think about Wellington Zoo as being a park or a forest where animals live. So I don't want to have every animal squashed into the site, because that does not tell a good story. It needs to be an environment that people feel happy and healthy in, and they can look at animals that feel happy and healthy. So I think moving away from that menagerie collector mentality is something we will see more and more of in the zoo world, because you don't need that. You need good storytelling. You need good integration of animal story and experience.
I fully agree with you. I think there's so much forming this picture of giving a good experiences, and you guys are doing amazing. So what's the biggest breakthrough or achievement since you started your journey at Wellington Zoo?
From an organisational perspective, I think rebuilding the zoo into what it is now to what it was 20 years ago. I mean, that's amazing. I was walking around with someone this morning and he said, you should be very proud of what you've achieved. I said, well, what we've achieved. And I do think it's a beautiful space. We do a lot of community work and a lot of people say it's a very healing space. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm very proud when I walk around the zoo that it is beautiful and that we have a lot of wild birds flying around and we have beautiful, beautiful trees and things like that. So I'm very proud of that. But there are some things organisationally, like I think Te Kohanga we've talked about. That was quite a game changer for us when we opened that in 2009. But I think things like our sustainability work has been quite world leading. And I'm very proud of that because on a global scale, we don't have the same money and resources as some of the big zoos. But we actually took a decision to be quite a sustainable zoo. And we took that decision many years ago. And so I think that has really borne fruit for us as an organisation. And it really does set us apart from many other zoos. But I think just the rebuilding of the zoo, the way it looks, the way it feels, the care of our animals has improved immensely, and also the whole thing around sustainability.
There's been a lot of transformation and you're coming on 20 years in the zoo.
Yeah.
I just want to run off two awards. So 2013, you were the world's first Toitū Carbon Zero certified zoo. And in 2018, you won the inaugural WAZA Environmental Sustainability Award. That's the World Aquarium and Zoo Association. So this might be an obvious question, but why is it important that zoos show leadership in sustainability and not just biodiversity?
For me, it's obvious, but I will explain. If we're going to protect the planet, if we think that our aim in life is to protect the planet, protect species, protect people, it's got to be a sustainable future, right? Because if you don't have sustainability, you can't have conservation, because we're just going to be fighting a losing battle. It'll just be a constant battle to try and conserve species if people are not behaving sustainably. And that's everybody. And that's that critical mass of change we need. So when we became Carbon Zero certified, we didn't think we were ready for it. We had a consultant come in and work with us and he said, you're ready, you should go for this. And we're like, still got some things to do. So I always say to people, just start, because you're probably doing more than you think you're doing anyway. So then when we got that, of course, it really gave the zoo momentum to do even more. This is quite exciting. And my board chair at the time, he said, well, I want a full-page ad in the paper to say that we're carbon zero. Okay. So we did that. He was very excited about that. And when we won the WAZA Environmental Sustainability Award, the inaugural one, I thought, no one else can win the inaugural award. Being competitive now. But I thought that's so cool for us to win that. And so many organisations around the world have come to visit us to say, what have you been doing in sustainability? Talk to us about it. Some of them who've done that visit to us, they've got so many more resources than us and they've taken it to a whole other level. And I'm really happy about that, because go for it. Do what you can. If you've got the resources, do more. So I just think conservation and sustainability, two sides of the one coin. Humans can do a lot in terms of sustainability. Not everyone can play in the conservation space. But if you're sustainable in your everyday practice and your everyday life, you're helping the conservationists. So indirectly, you're actually making such a difference.
For sure. And I think sustainability really impacts the habitat of wildlife. Wildlife's not separate from the habitat. I think one thing I really appreciate about what you've said now is that you're not hiding away from your achievements. And this is focusing on New Zealanders. We've been told, don't celebrate your achievements, don't be the tall poppy out there, and especially in the conservation space. And I think it's important to celebrate them. So thank you.
It's very important to celebrate, and you can't, nothing's 100% perfect, ever. There's always more to do. But celebrate the milestones as you do more. That's really important to do that, because there's a lot of people who've given a lot of their time and effort to reach those milestones. So celebrate those people. I don't see anything wrong with that.
I think it's super important because, one, you're actually acknowledging yourself, your heart mahi, your success, but you're also sending a message out to the wider community that this is happening. Everything is connected. this is super important. And I think it's great that you hit that milestone and that you had other people invited them in for their improvement as well. I think it's just a really good showcase of working together, achieving together the positive outcomes we can have. And not only that, Wellington Zoo is actually having its 120th anniversary in 2026, so next year at the time of
Yeah.
recording. It was also New Zealand's first zoo and Wellington's oldest conservation organization. So congratulations. It's so incredible to talk to you today. So the big question, I guess, is what's next? What's the future vision for the Wellington Zoo?
Well, we have developed our master plan. It's a 20 to 40-year master plan, and it's going to be incredible in terms of the animal spaces, in terms of what we do for our visitors. My favourite, of course, is our glamping idea. So people can stay overnight in the zoo, which I can't wait to see. People will be able to stay overnight in the zoo in cabins and hear the lions, hear the gibbons, and just really experience what it's like to be in the zoo. I mean, we do sleepovers now and we do things like that, but I'm talking about good cabins with nice beds and that people can stay here overnight. So that's one of the big projects that's in the master plan. But also, again, we've taken a look at who are the animals we can care for very well. What are our storylines? Who are our conservation partners? So the top part of the zoo will be devoted to Madagascar, like us, an island country. And we do a lot of work in Madagascar and we have a lot of Madagascan species. So we will devote that top part of the zoo to Madagascar, which will be a change and I think a good one because it will allow us to do even more of a storyline around Madagascar. Some of the big projects will stay, like Te Kohanga will stay. He Tuku Araha, our New Zealand area, will stay. But then we'll think about what we do in Asia around where the tigers and the sun bears are, and there might be changes there as well. But it's really about thinking about the site. What are the animals that are going to be in our species plan going forward? What are the stories around that? And then how do we actually ensure that we're sustainable, not only in terms of our sustainability work, but also financially as well. So I think the future is what I was talking about with our conservation partners. It's really building on what we've done to date and making it even better. And so that our community really loves and values their zoo because they can see what we're trying to do and what is the work we're trying to do for species.
Wow. Glamping.
Yeah, I've got goosebumps right now.
I'm imagining us recording a podcast in like a tent with the lions roaring in the background. One thing you mentioned was financial sustainability, and 120 years old with this large base of wildlife staff resources. That's a lot to manage, but also starting a new zoo, I imagine, is a huge capital outlay. How does zoos typically finance this? Like, where does the money come from?
We have a very good relationship with Wellington City Council. Wellington City Council actually owns the zoo site because we're on town belt land. So the trust runs the zoo on behalf of the City Council. In terms of our operating budget, the trust provides 60% of that and the council provides 40% of that. We also have a lot of donations that people give to us, which is so appreciated, from the community. We also have obviously capital projects. The council gives us some money or 75% towards those capital projects. We fundraise the other 25%. So we've been very well supported by trusts and foundations in New Zealand and also through other donors as well. And we vest that money back to the City Council if we've raised that money. We just had a wonderful person give us money towards our penguin habitat refurbishment, and she has donated her own personal money to that. So we do get donations from individuals, trusts and foundations, and obviously funding from the City Council and funding from the trust. So when our visitors come in, the money they're paying to either do one of our experiences or come and visit the zoo, that all goes into running the zoo. We're a charity. We're not a for-profit organisation. We don't have shareholders giving out dividends. Anything that we make goes back into caring for the animals, caring for our people, caring for our community. It really needs to be sustainable into the future because, as you say, it costs a lot of money to look after animals well and to look after our people well because safety and health and safety and well-being very important to us as people who look after other people in their workplace.
Thank you for shining a light on how this all works. It's super important to understand for the amazing mahi you do. But Wellington Zoo, of course, isn't the only zoo in New Zealand and on the worldwide stage who do this amazing mahi connecting our zoos and conservation and so much more. So we touched on WAZA, so the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums before. How does that tie into what we've already talked about, and why is it so important to have a global body in this space?
Well, as the current president of WAZA, I should have a good answer to this, shouldn't I? What WAZA does is it brings all of our communities around the world together, and we can have conversations within different cultural contexts that you can't do in a regional association. I have been president of our regional association as well, and that's very much Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea. But globally, when WAZA has a conference, we have people from all around the world with all different contexts and all different reasons for doing the work they do. So for me, the global body is the one that can bridge those cultural contexts. We can set standards and guidance about what people should be doing around animal welfare and conservation so that we are trusted partners and leaders in that, in particularly those two areas. And that we can then work with the regional associations to see what does that look like on the ground for the zoos in their cultural context. So some of the things I've been involved in was when we wrote the sustainability strategy, protecting our planet. So we used the sustainable development goals to write that strategy, but it was we tried to make it very useful for people in all cultural contexts. So there's strategies like that around animal welfare, around conservation, around sustainability, around reducing carbon. We do a lot of these guides and strategies for people and that they can use to set strategies and standards in their own zoos. So from a global perspective, I think WAZA can communicate globally on different issues, and we can do that more than the regional associations can, or support the regional associations in terms of what they might want to have a stance on.
Yeah, right. That's really important. I think bridging cultural context is something I'd never considered. And having that trust, the credibility that this represents all partners, all areas, rather than sure that might work in your region, but you don't understand my side. Global animal welfare standards are an important topic, right? Like the way that we treat our animals can vary depending on cultures. So why is it important to have these global standards that are consistent across the board?
Well, I was the chair of the Ethics and Animal Welfare Committee when we finished writing our animal welfare goal. We have these goals that we set for people. So there's the strategies, the guides, and now the goals. So the animal welfare goal was one of the first that we wrote, and that took us a long time to write. It took us about 8 years. With a lot of people putting a lot of effort into it. And we use the 5 domains of animal welfare model that was developed here in New Zealand, actually, by Professor David Mellor and other people at Massey University. And it really is a fantastic model for animal welfare because it looks at 4 physical domains and it also looks at the affective state or the mental domain for animals. So we use that as the basis for the animal welfare goal. So the animal welfare goal transcends cultures because the 5 domains is not a cultural context. It's actually what the animal is experiencing, feeling, thinking. And that doesn't matter whether you're in Africa or Asia or anywhere, the animals are still experiencing those things. So the 5 domains sets the standard with the animal welfare goal. And then the regional associations take that overarching goal and then they apply it to their members in terms of an accrediting process. So they will assess their members about whether or not they've hit the goals within that framework. That's really important because we have to have consistency. We have to be using the latest science to provide consistency to make sure the animals on a global scale across WAZA members are getting the same treatment and the same quality of life. David Mellor always talks about a life worth living, and that's why these goals are very important.
Really curious to know, though, with these goals, is it consistent for all species? Or does an invertebrate have the same standards as, say, an elephant?
Does. I mean, it's harder to judge some of the things for animals that we may be less familiar with how they might actually be feeling. But you can make some judgments about the physical domains as to what that animal is experiencing in its life. You can make some judgments, a little bit more subjective for an invertebrate than it is for a mammal. You can still assess the animal within that framework.
Yeah, I think it's very important to acknowledge that all sentient beings do have those feelings, whether we're super familiar with them or not, whether it's easy to observe or not, it is still there. And I'm really, really grateful to have that global body. And I just want to address a little bit the elephant in the room, because there are still a lot of people who are anti-zoos, who misconceive zoos as pure entertainment and, those bad institutions, which WAZA zoos really are not. So how are you tackling this challenge? How are you building a bridge to build understanding and trust?
It's in what we do. It's in our actions. I think there are bad zoos and bad aquariums. I'd be crazy to think that they're not. But no one ever talks about bad museums, do they? And I think the reason they don't is because we're dealing with living beings, so we're under more scrutiny. So it's actually understanding that we are under that scrutiny, so we have an absolute responsibility to act accordingly. So I think there will always be people who will not like zoos for whatever reason. But if you can engage with those people, they can actually respect what you're doing if you're a good zoo. And I had that with our animal welfare committee. I asked someone to come on the animal welfare committee many years ago, and she said, well, I'm not an animal welfare expert. I said, no, but you're our litmus test. You can challenge us if we've got it right. She was on our committee for a number of years, and she said, I've never seen so much science since I was at university. And I said, well, we don't make it up. So again, it's about being transparent, it's about engaging. And you can shift people's view. They may not always think that, they might think the world would be better without zoos. I happen to not believe that myself. I think that zoos are becoming more and more important as the world goes on, as long as they're good zoos. But I think it's about engaging, and not everyone's going to agree, but it's about being able to be respected for what you do. And I think if we're not very careful about our standards and about how we are with our animals, then the scrutiny will come. And that's why I always say to people, if you're worried about a zoo or aquarium that you're going to visit, see if they're accredited. See if they are a member of their regional association. See if they're a member of WAZA, and are they accredited? Ask the questions before you go. And people have asked me over the years, they say, oh, I'm travelling so-and-so there, do you think I should go? Sometimes I say, don't do it. It is about being honest about that, and about saying, well, accreditation is your first port of call, making sure they're accredited for animal welfare and making sure that what they do is kosher.
100%, because you can vote with your wallet. And if you truly care, that's what we did when we went overseas into Asia, And just in general, I always look on the website and see if I can see an accreditation. But I just want to address, there's obviously WAZA, but there's also things like regional bodies, and you already mentioned the ZAA before. What's the difference when people are looking on websites? What can I expect if I go to ZAA or something that's ZAA and WAZA? Is it simply the same?
No, it's different. So WAZA is not an accrediting body. WAZA is a body that sets standards, sets strategies, works with regional associations. The regional associations like the Zoo and Aquarium Association Australasia, the American Zoo Association, European Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and others, Japanese Association of Zoos and Aquariums, Southeast Asian Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and the list goes on. Those are the accrediting bodies. So they are the ones who take these standards and apply them to their members. Those associations that are doing that are members of WAZA themselves. So they have to go through a process of membership like all people do, like all organisations do. But those associations work very, very closely, and they have seats on WAZA Council, for example. They're on task forces, they're on committees. So those regional associations are heavily involved with the work of WAZA, because often they're the ones who have to do the work. So, for example, the animal welfare goal, they're the ones that have to take this document we've produced and make it real. The conservation goal, the 2030 conservation goal, they're going to be the ones that are going to have to assess their members against the conservation goal for WAZA. So our relationship with them is critical and it's integrated. We talk to them about what this means for them. And sometimes they say it's a lot of work, but then they say, but we'll do it. So might take us a year or so, but then they can adjust. But without them, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about in terms of a global consistency, it wouldn't happen without those associations. So they are really the first port of call if someone wants to know about accreditation. They're the ones to look for.
So essentially, if I want to go visit a zoo or aquarium that I'm not familiar with, I look out for that on their website, or if it's not on there, I will ask. And then
Yes.
if they have the accreditation, I can go there with a good conscience that they're looking after the animals.
Yep. And it's not all the same. Like it's not, you might visit Wellington Zoo and then you might visit somewhere else. Won't be the same. But what you will get with an accredited zoo is that they are being assessed. They have to justify what they're doing. So at least you will get that as a basic standard if they're accredited. And then people go beyond that, of course. There's always those who want to, rise above the minimum standard. But it's not even minimum standard actually, because minimum standard is what government sets. So the associations set higher than that.
That's awesome. That's really good to know. And I think it's a really practical tip for anyone who wants to do it with a good conscience. So what other key challenges wearing your president of WAZA hat are you facing on the global stage, and how are you overcoming them through collaboration?
We do a lot of work with a lot of other global organisations around things like animal trading, wildlife trafficking. These are big, hairy, wicked problems that we face around the world. And it comes back to this idea that animals are commodities, and trying to stop wildlife trafficking, thinking about where people are getting animals from, how are they using them, all of these things. These are big things that we have to grapple with, and WAZA alone can't do that. We have to work with other organisations like CITES and the IUCN and really have joined at the hip positions on these things. I think humans have this really strange, it comes back to what we talked about right at the beginning, this curiosity about animals and this status thing about animals. And the people we know who are doing wildlife trafficking are the same people who are drug running and gun running and people trafficking. But they have less penalty when they traffic animals than if they are caught doing those other things. They can make a lot of money out of it, which is terrible. Working with these other interagency bodies and trying to stop things like wildlife trafficking is a big, big thing that we're going to face into the future, for sure.
So essentially stepping up and giving things a voice that can't speak for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and different associations do different programs and processes. Like the European Association ran a community program called the Silent Forest, and that was about Asian forests losing all their birds to wildlife trafficking. So we can actually be a voice in the community that a lot of agencies can't be. So if we can use our voice with our visitors and things like that, then we get a big critical mass of people hearing those messages, working in unison with those other global agencies.
I think being in New Zealand, we are at the bottom of the world. We are this beautiful little landmass separated from so much. And you know that wildlife trafficking, for example, is going on. But until you're in the communities where it's happening, it's easy to think of it something over there. Earlier this year, we were doing a bit of travel and we saw some of this firsthand, and it's really confronting. It's really like I can feel emotions welling up right now talking about it. And I think having a global body is really important for this because it ensures that we're all connected rather than just saying, oh, that's over there, that's their problem. Yeah, and just let's put some judgment on and leave.
And interestingly, we have got trafficking happening in New Zealand. We repatriated some little geckos a few years back from Germany. So it happens even in our little corner of the world, not to the degree it's happening in other parts of the world, but it happens here as well. People have to be very aware of what is happening in the animal space. And I think that, having a joined up position is really important, I think. And as I said, not actually being part of it. Like we go back to the otter cafes. Don't go there. We know that that's wrong, so don't do it.
Totally. And I also think it's a really big message. We are watching worldwide, globally, we are watching, and it's not okay. So obviously, that's something we need to overcome, which leads me to the question, what does success look like for WAZA?
I think for WAZA, it's really being that trusted voice for animal welfare and conservation, really having a voice at the table. The World Conservation Congress is happening as we speak, and WAZA has a voice at that Congress, a very loud voice. And I really think being at the table, being able to talk about our expertise, talk about our standards, talk about what we would like to see happening for wildlife and wild places. And that's success for WAZA, I think, that whole advocacy piece, relationship and partnerships piece, more and more. Our partnerships and advocacy head, he's a lawyer. He's worked for big animal agencies like I4 in the past. He understands some of this legal work. So the work that he's doing is only going to grow. And I think that WAZA will have that very loud voice as we position ourselves against some of these, as I said, wicked problems that we really need to grapple with. I think for success for us would be less animal trafficking, much better accredited zoos. I would even go so far as to shutting down bad zoos. And also, I think just being able to work with people who have the same set of values to actually make lives better for animals and people.
I would love to see no bad zoos anymore, because that would be an amazing message globally as well, being like, let's just put the animals first.
And I just think that, in my view, these organisations will not last because society will not accept them. As you were saying before, Anna, people will vote with their feet. And I think that these organisations will not last because they're not delivering what society wants for animals or for themselves. So I don't think we'll ever be rid of them all, but they certainly will not make the grade to be members of their regional association or WAZA. I remember many years ago, I had to present to a government panel, and the chair of the panel said, "Do you think that all zoos in New Zealand should be members of ZA?" And I said, "No, I do not." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because they don't make the grade." And he said to me, "Good answer." So it's not just about having members for members' sake. It's about having members who play to the standard, who are prepared to accept the standard and actually deliver on that. So those other organisations are never going to make the grade, and they eventually won't be around.
Awesome. Hey, Karen, near the end of each podcast, we ask every guest a question, and that is that what does conservation mean to them? Now, you've worn a lot of different hats throughout your career to date, and so I'd love to know, what does conservation mean to you?
I think conservation is all about people, actually. People go, no, it's not. It's about animals. Yes, the animals are the beneficiaries, and the habitats are the beneficiaries of the work that people do and the decisions people make in their lives. They're the beneficiaries, and they deserve to be beneficiaries. But conservation to me is about all of us in all walks of life understanding that we are on this earth to do good. And if we think about what's good, every single person can make a difference. Every single person can take one step towards doing something good for the planet. So for me, conservation is all about people and people's mindsets. And that's why I'm really keen on making sure that communities are involved and included in conservation discussions, because that's where people will feel, yep, I can do this. I can make a difference. That every one of us can do that, even if it's just not using plastic. That's a simple thing you can do. But if everyone did that, how good would it be? So yeah, for me, conservation is about people.
Yep, fully agreed. That's been my steepest learning curve, I think, since starting my own conservation journey. And you're so right. Every individual matters, and we choose the difference we want to make in this world. Often gets underestimated, but it is so true at the end of the day.
I mean, if we think about what animals are facing and we think about what habitats are facing, it's all human-made. The animals are just living their lives. They're just doing their thing out in the forest or whatever they are. We come in with the chainsaws and the whatever. So a lot of this is human-induced. That's why I think it's about people.
And at the same time, a lot of the remarkable success stories have come from people.
Correct. Remarkable success stories.
So we need more people helping nature.
Yes.
Hey, it's been a great podcast. I've learned so much personally. So firstly, thank you very much. But how can people support your work and get involved?
I think if they visit their local accredited zoo, that's a really good idea. And finding ways where you can be involved in conservation or sustainability and think about what you can do in your daily life to actually make the world a better place. Just think about the planet a little bit more. I think people could do that a whole lot more.
Kia ora to that. Thank you, Karen, for sharing all of your experience and the amazing mahi that's going on in the zoo space, bringing everything together. We really appreciate your time and sharing what's going on with our
Yeah,
audience.
thank you.
Kia ora. I've really enjoyed the chat. It's been really good to talk about these issues. Big, hairy, audacious goals for us all.
Love it.
Love it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank
Kia
you.
ora.
Kia ora.